In this tutorial, we're going to be covering the booking screen and the calendar and how they relate as far as the information for equipment assignment and the availability of equipment, and how that information is translated in the booking screen and then displayed in this screen. The purpose of that is so that when you're doing a booking for a new client and you're adding them to the calendar, you can review the current equipment and the availability of that equipment, and it could be listed in this area here of the current status of that equipment before you try to assign that equipment to the customer. Now in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take the equipment assignment and we're going to press on the button at the end of the row, or we're going to go to the availability and push on that button at the end of the row depending on where we want to go. So let's do that for the equipment availability. When you click the availability, it's going to bring you directly into the equipment screen for the equipment that is in the record that you just looked at. In this screen, it describes the equipment, and this is like equipment availability, but it is also an inventory screen for the equipment. It has a service area for indicating the service and work orders and service material used in the actual service. Now let's go back only because we're going to take a look at the equipment on the assignment side of this. So let's return by hitting the edit appointment. It brings us back to the same screen we were just looking at. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to look at where this goes as far as the record for Ben Franklin for this equipment that is assigned to him. And what it does is it brings us into the equipment assignment portal for the individual item in that record. So you can take a look at the actual assignment row that is in the portal on the booking screen. In this screen, you can reassign the equipment status, or you can change the dates on the one record if you wanted to. If then you click back on the appointment screen, the modification would show on this record in this screen. The same thing goes for the equipment availability. If you change it in the equipment inventory screen, it will modify it in this record. It's important to understand that so you know how this information is translated from the booking and from the equipment inventory screen. So let's go back to the portal record again, and if you click on the end of the row, you will go to the record for that particular area in the booking, and I would pick Ben Franklin. And by the way I could recognize it is when I was in the edit appointment screen, the Ben Franklin is number 2 as far as his ID is concerned. And Ben only has one record in the booking. So if you find Ben Franklin, all of the assignments for equipment, where we look over here at equipment assignments, will be reflected in this record. So on the edit appointment screen, these two records were actually shown on that screen. When a new customer or a current customer is being assigned equipment, you go ahead and assign the equipment in this manner. What you would do is in the new record where it's blank here, you would use the drop down and you would add whatever is equipment that the customer wants to be assigned to. Now if it's all going to be on the same day, it's just a matter of picking one, the next, the next, the next, depending upon what the customer is looking for, until you fill out all the assignments. Now as you put in a piece of equipment for an assignment, the next thing you would do is use the drop down, and this will give you the same name as the equipment that you picked in this row, but now it would give you the serial number for that item as well, and that will go in this row. Once you've assigned the serial number, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to change the status that's appropriate for what you're doing. For example, if it's a pending reservation where the client is actually calling in a reservation and asking for equipment that he can pick up, that's what you would do for a pending reservation. Once he comes to the business, you could change the status as we're setting up the billing to be rented, and you finalize all entries to make sure that they're correct. If he's returning an item after the rental is complete, we would go ahead back to the original record that was added, and then what we would do is go ahead and show returned, and that would update the status here. And also we'll talk a little later about how it is done on the availability to change that also to returned or rented. Now as you add the date, it would be for the date that the client is actually taking the equipment out and at the time that they're actually starting the rental. The date that they're going to return it would also be added. The return time is left open until they actually return the item, so you can put in the actual time. For example, the rental, if it's 24-hour based, they should bring it back before 11 a.m. But if they bring it back at 8 a.m., it's not going to affect the billing as far as the cost unless they overrun the billing. If they overrun the billing and say, for example, they brought it back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, what you could do is you could go in there and you could take a late return fee, which is this item here, that will always be at the top of the list for the equipment inventory. You would put that into a new record and give them one more day's charge, because any part of a 24-hour period is an additional day's charge. And you can show that in the record where you would have a late fee added for that particular day that was added. You can prorate that if you want to a certain number of hours. That is your operational requirement. Now, in this case, the next thing, this is calculated based on the 2 dates to give you the actual number of days, so you don't have to calculate it. And the last thing you would do is assign that person to that rented item. Now, for example, if I look at another record where I have one here, you can see that this was a lawnmower, this serial number, it was returned, and it was returned on this date at 11 a.m. and it was rented at 11 a.m. and returned on this date at 9 a.m. So there was no late fee, and then the person's name is in there. The most interesting part of this is that as you look at the person's record, it will be a history of everything that they rented in reverse order, meaning that the last thing they rented would go to the top of this screen. So you can see all the items in the last things that they've rented. And if you actually look at the information here and then pop over to the equipment availability, you can take a look at that serial numbered item and the name, like the lawnmower, and you could see that it has a pending reservation on it at the current time. And that pending reservation is actually Ben Franklin's reservation that we were looking at over here. If I clicked on Ben Franklin's record, you would see when I changed it, it changed it to Ben Franklin. And if I go back over to the equipment assignment, you can see there is that actual lawnmower being reserved on the 26th. Now, in the equipment availability, that makes this so different is this is a static list of all the items that are in inventory and their current status. So anytime that this changes, where it's either rented, returned, or whatever, you have to, as the current client brings back an item or rents it out or it goes into service, you would change the status on that item in here. That seems like busy work, but what it does, it's integral to making sure that when you're doing issue and return of items, that you're able to track everything. And this is actually quite easy to do once you get the hang of it. That if you are sending stuff out or returning it or putting it into service, you will automatically come over to this availability screen and mark the record for its next status. Now, you have to be careful that when you're doing that, that you have the actual item in the inventory. In that case, in most cases, the item will say available if you're going to put it into service, meaning that it is in the shop and you have it in your inventory area. Once it goes into service, if somebody tries to rent this item and they see it's in service, they need to go over to the service equipment screen and make sure when it's supposed to be in service and when it's supposed to be coming out of service, so you can now put it back into available. Once the work order is complete and it's available in the service area, they should change the status here back to available so that you know that you can rent this item. Now, from the service equipment area, it shows the equipment group that it is, and this is also a drop down in that area. There's also a cost for that item. For example, in this case, its standard cost is $10. And that's based on a 24-hour period. And then there's a status block at the end of this right here where it shows what little message you may want to put on the actual item for a note. And this also shows up in the edit appointment screen. Now, what's kind of important about this is that you can mark it for a quote. So the information in this screen and also over here for the availability can be shown that this is a quote for an item, so that when it goes into the invoicing area, there's also this same comment where on the invoice, it'll show that the item is not actually rented, but it's being quoted. So you can actually create, through a search, an invoice that shows only the items that are either quoted or temporarily reserved until the client comes in. This is stuff you'll get used to doing. It's not that hard, so it might take a little time and a little practice to do that. And as you can see in this area, deliver to client. This is where if an item is actually too large for a client to take himself, you may or they may request it to be delivered to a work site or a location. So you would mark it that way. That would mean that you would want to go back to the calendar and assign on this particular person's item right here. In this case, it's Ben Franklin's gas mower, this item right here. If I go back to the edit screen, you'll see that Ben Franklin has that item, and that what we want to do is, if you look in the right here on the assignment on the appointment, you'll see that lawnmower. What you'd want to do is you'd want to also come up here and put a delivery check mark here so that this would show up in the delivery schedule. And what you would do is make a comment in the to-do list that this thing needs to be delivered and what date it's going to be delivered and where it's going to be delivered to in the to-do list. And if you need to assign somebody to it, you can assign that person by clicking on this plus sign. You assign it to the date and the time and then what they're going to be doing as far as taking it to a location. Back on the to-do list, you can do an individual assignment on each thing. For example, there may be steps incurred. For example, going to the inventory location where the item is at and picking it up, taking it to this location and doing a certain thing, and then at a later time coming back and returning the item. So those are the areas where you could use this within the appointment area. If this is an actual work task, as we covered before, where you're going to an assignment where you're going to deliver something, but it takes some assembly and testing, and you're going to charge the client for it, you would create another record. You would put in the client, the date that you did the thing, the description of the item, and the time spent at that site, so that this can be putting into the billing, so that the billing would show the cost for the services rendered. Now that's up to you and your business whether you want to do it that way, but it is optional and you have the ability to do that if you want to. Now going back to the booking screen, we're going to go into the record and back to that record for the billing screen and Ben Franklin. If you needed to at this point, you could modify the booking information if it's changed. And also, as you leave this booking record and you're adding the data, for example, I'll recall, again, I say this each time, that you need to submit the data if you're on the server. If you're using the iPad or another device where it has a client server connection, you do not have to hit the submit sign or submit button to save it. At the end of that information, let's just recap a little bit. We were on the edit appointment screen. We came to the booking screen or to the booking portal, depending on what button we hit. We went in and we added an assignment for rental equipment. And this is what you would do from this record for this client that's standing in front of you or is making a phone reservation. And you would just list the equipment that you're going to be putting out on the rental. You would check it to make sure that it's available before you assign it as far as the rental is concerned, and then change this status to pending reservation so that somebody else will not try to send this item out and then mess up your assignment for your pending reservation. Okay, and you can also put an annotation at the end. Now to this point, we have not covered billing, but we will be covering that in the next tutorial. So now to go out of the app, what you would do is tap on the appointment button at the top to return to the client's record, and then click the close to go back to the main calendar. That concludes this tutorial. If you have any further questions, please either send an email or call for technical support. Thank you.